Welcome to the Infinite Jungle. On today's show, I'll be talking about updates shared from Ethereum All Core Developers Consensus Call 137. I'll also be talking about my experience at the annual Ethereum Community Conference, ECC, which was held in Brussels, Belgium this year. But before we start the show, here is a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. I had a wonderful week-long break from this show, and I hope you all had a wonderful week as well. I was not only taking a little break from work for the July 4th holiday in the US, but I also attended ECC, which is the biggest Ethereum-focused conference that's hosted in Europe every single year. Usually hosted in Paris, but because this year is the Olympics are being held in Paris, it moved to Brussels. And at ECC, as per usual, it brought together literally everybody who is anyone in the space in the Ethereum ecosystem. People who are working as a validator, running validator node software for Ethereum, wallet developers, of course, the Ethereum protocol developers, roll-up teams, even competitors of Ethereum, other ecosystems, teams like Solana were all there. It was quite the Big Tent event, and Vitalik was there, major crypto companies, Ethereum crypto companies like Consensus, all of the major roll-ups, Base, Optimism, Arbitrum, they were all there. So all this to say, ECC was huge, and it is pretty huge every single year. I would say probably the biggest Ethereum focused event that happens in North America is, of course, ETH Denver. And then there's DevCon. I think it's one of the earliest Ethereum conferences that's actually organized by the Ethereum Foundation itself. And DevCon moves around every single year. It's hosted in a different city every year. ETH Denver is, of course, hosted in ETH Denver. But I would say those are, like, in my view, the three biggest Ethereum conferences. And with these conferences, there's always a ton of side events going on. This year was no different. And there's always the same types of takeaways that many people might get from these events. One of them that I've been hearing a lot on Twitter and also when I was at the conference is there's so many infrastructure projects, so many people trying to build the infra, but where are the apps? Where are the apps that people are going to use? I find that takeaway quite cyclical, though. I think that during a phase where there's a lot of application development, a lot of user activity happening on chain, people are like, oh, there's not enough scalability. There needs to be more infra. There needs to be more focus on the actual, protocol itself and how it's going to support all of this activity. And then when activity is quite down and people are focusing on just building infra, there's a lot more comments about how there's not enough app development happening. I think it goes back and forth. But anyways, that to say, I think definitely one of the takeaways was that there was quite a lot of builders at this event and not quite a lot of users. Most of the people that I was meeting and talking to at ECC were, of course, building, a new type of roll up or data availability strategy or a shared sequencing layer or some kind of solution to mitigate MEV. And yes, there definitely was a lack, I think, of people that are just using actually the tech that is being built. Um, I didn't come across people that were saying, "Oh, I'm an airdrop farmer. I'm a points farmer. I like to use the protocol for X, Y, and Z reasons." um, but I wasn't surprised. That was basically what I was expecting going into this conference. Because I think that's the phase that we're in terms of what people are building and doing in the space. But I will note, for probably the first time ever, for a major Ethereum conference like this, I got the sense from attendees that the Ethereum protocol wasn't at the top of people's minds, and people weren't thinking about changes to the protocol as really either, the key. milestone in which is going to really impact what they're going to build, or maybe really like um, jet it, like support it into the next phase of its adoption, or really even think about the next code change as being a blocker to what they're doing, or railing, or like going on about how the prioritization of this code change over another was the wrong move or was the right move. These are conversations, of course, that I have all the time because I'm focusing on tracking what's happening on the Ethereum protocol. But as I was attending ECC, I one of the things I really realized was that the focus of builders and the focus of people in this ecosystem is truly shifting away from what can or can't be enabled by the Ethereum protocol, which was really surprising to me because if we think about the prior upgrades, everybody in the ecosystem was so excited for the merge. The transition to proof of stake was one of the initial promises that protocol developers had made about the Ethereum network. It would one day become proof of stake. In the original roadmap of Ethereum, the transition to proof of stake was going to be the final phase of Ethereum development. And so everybody was so excited about the merge. Everybody was talking about the merge. Shanghai, the very similar thing, being able to withdraw your stake. It was like kind of the completion of Ethereum's transition to proof of stake. It was a huge topic of discussion. What would happen to the price of ETH once withdrawals were enabled, and we all know what happened. ETH price was still ripped, so that's great. But then with Denkun, I think it was clear that the type of users that would most be impacted, the people who would be impacted the most by Denkun would be rollups. There was the upgrade, the headlining kind of code change within the Denkun upgrade was the introduction of blobs, EIP 4844, proto dank sharding. And so rollups, of course, really cared about Denkun. To some degree, though. I don't think rollups really cared even about the timing of Denkun. I think some rollups were also very, very okay with not being ready day one of Denkun. I think most of the major ones were, but rollups could take their time with their adoption of what happened on the protocol layer. But with Pectra, now that we're thinking about Pectra, there's a ton going into Pectra, and a lot of which will impact validators, will impact people that are staking, will impact rollups, of course, especially if PeerDAS is going to be included into the upgrade. But even so, I don't think that there was a lot of talk about Pectra outside of the talks that were being given by Ethereum protocol developers. And so much of the focus, I think, of what's going on in the ecosystem is on what can be built now based on what the Ethereum protocol is like now. And sure, there will be changes coming up in the future um, that will expedite or help certain initiatives on Ethereum, such as the rollup centric roadmap to scale on Ethereum. Of course, PeerDAS will help with that. But the types of announcements that are being made is even without these changes today, and regardless of when Pectra is going to go live, because it's clear, Pectra, very slim chances Pectra is going to be going live this year. Regardless of when Pectra goes live, the kind of innovation that's going to be happening on rollups, the kind of innovation that's going to be happening to the MEV supply chain, kind of innovations that are going to be happening for staking, that's all chugging along with or without the protocol. The focus is on what can be built today, um, and what is happening on the protocol is starting to fade into the background, I think, more and more, which in some sense is a good thing, that it is what I think protocol developers want to see happen over time on Ethereum. Um, but ECC was one of the conferences that I could I could see already that trend happening in the way people were talking and presenting. Um, presenting about what they were building and the milestones that they were looking ahead to. Starknet, one of the layer two rollups on Ethereum, one of the first, I think, ZK rollups on Ethereum, announced that they are going to be moving ahead with, or trying to move ahead with, enabling staking on their platform. And staking is a really critical step for rollups to decentralize. But of course, there are other ways in which rollups can decentralize. They can rely on restaking protocols like Eigenlayer. They can rely on shared sequencing networks like Astria or Espresso. Espresso we've had on the show before, actually. But of course, kind of like the protocol development happening on Ethereum, the timeline for these other alternative solutions isn't clear. And it's not something that's going to be holding back Starknet from trying to pursue higher levels of decentralization today. DVT is another example of a technology that I think in recent weeks and months have been making quite a big stride in terms of maturity and adoption, that again is happening all independent of what's going on from the protocol layer. And while protocol developers of course are so focused on the protocol itself and making sure that it continues to grow, there is now more than ever just so much happening beyond the protocol. And the protocol itself is really not that important anymore, I would say. Yes, you can quote me on that. Because the rollup centric roadmap essentially, now I've been thinking about this, but the rollup centric roadmap of Ethereum essentially means that a lot of the hard problems for how to scale blockchains, how to deal with the MEV problem, interoperability, liquidity fragmentation, all of the hard problems are going to have to be solved outside of Ethereum, because Ethereum is shrinking down what it wants to be. It wants to just be a data availability layer for rollups. So when it comes to where the money is made, in terms of interfacing with users, fees, MEV, all of that is going to happen on a protocol outside of Ethereum, on many protocols outside of Ethereum. And that just means that when we're talking about very cutting edge technology and very cutting edge solutions, some of it might apply to Ethereum and could be, incorporated into the protocol. But whether or not, even if it does or even if it doesn't matter. The application of these technologies and the point of this research, the point is for it to move forward and help kind of all that's going on outside of the Ethereum protocol now. And so I think that makes the protocol not the primary focus anymore of the conversations that happen at these conferences. And that was pretty new to me. That made me think maybe I should also start to educate myself a little bit more about what happens beyond the protocol, because I think the role of the Ethereum protocol is developers intentionally want it to shrink. But already I'm seeing in terms of conversations and the way people are building and working on solutions for very hard problems when it comes to blockchains, these solutions no longer depend on Ethereum protocol developers being part of that conversation. Um, it all can happen very much independently, and it already is in the way that side events are being structured, and in the way that um, products are being built. The primary, I think, users and the primary, I think, people that are interested in all of this is not necessarily the stakeholders, I guess, of just the Ethereum ecosystem. It's now people that are going to be interfacing with layer twos primarily, or even interfacing with, say, an alternative layer one that has a bridge over to maybe another layer two, or in some way connects to the Ethereum blockchain. um, yeah, there's just so many possibilities, I guess, for how these technologies can be very applicable. And some of the products, I think, are now not being built for Ethereum. They're being built for use on any chain. And in that sense, yeah, I thought that that was a really new development, that where the Ethereum protocol wasn't the focus, or even an important topic of conversation, at least a part of the conversations that I was part of at this year's ECC. And so much happening with or without Ethereum protocol's next Pectra upgrade. People have kind of moved past that and are building for users and building in such a way where the protocol of Ethereum does not matter that much to what they're building. Or, yeah, of course, if the Ethereum protocol degrades in terms of quality and decentralization by a significant degree, then maybe that would impact, the conversations that I had at the conference, and people would maybe start to pay more attention. But I don't think that's a likely outcome, as Ethereum protocol developers are continuing to really work hard at making sure that the Ethereum protocol moves in a positive direction for all of the traits that we prioritize and think are important for a blockchain, like decentralization and scalability and whatnot. Um, but it was clear that the timeline for these things, it wasn't something that people were it was at the top of their mind. Um, so that was cool. Overall, I had a really great time at ECC, and I also have to say a major thank you to everyone at ECC who introduced themselves to me, and told me that they listened to the Infinite Jungle podcast. When I record these episodes, sometimes it's very hard to know that people are actually listening on the other end. Um, because really, sometimes all I have in the room is, the people that produce this show, like Finn and Chris and Will. um, but it was really great to be able to see you, my listeners, see what you look like, and now finally be able to put a face to some of you. And it motivates me more to try and be a better, podcaster, make these episodes more higher quality. So it was really a pleasure to be able to attend the conference and actually meet people who are listening to this show. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope to get to meet you guys again at another Ethereum conference. So that was my little summary of the ECC event. Let's talk a little bit about the dev call that happened very recently. The latest one was ACDC 137, and ACDC 137 was extremely short. Sometimes, developers really don't have that much to say on these calls, and it really goes to show again that, protocol work is important, but it's not always this action packed, debate of what gets into an upgrade and what's not, and the future of Ethereum at stake today. No, some of these calls are very vanilla. They're quite boring sometimes. And this one was a short call. I think it only lasted maybe 30 or 40 minutes. Attendance was a little bit slim on this call, partially because many developers were at ECC attending the conference. It was quite funny. There were certain developers um, that zoomed in to the call from the ECC conference venue. And at the Ethereum conference venue, there is a ball pit. Um, yes, there was a ball pit at ECC, and they were zooming in from the ball pit, and it was really funny because you could only see their heads floating, kind of in the ball pit. But yes, the call still went along, and one of the updates that was shared on the call was that Pectra DevNet 1 still has not launched. I truly thought that DevNet 1 would have launched by now. The way that developers were talking about it when they had completed DevNet 0 was that it would be up within, a week or two. And here we are several weeks later. Um, and DevNet 1 is still not live. However, developers talked about it. They said, look, we have a couple, the consensus layer clients, I think, are all ready. And we've got a couple execution layer clients that are also ready with the necessary changes from DevNet 0 to DevNet 1. There's a couple of changes that developers have made to the specs, and a couple execution layer clients are not ready to test out their newest implementation. And so developers will probably launch Pectra DevNet 1 next week. So by the time this episode goes live, we can see for ourselves whether or not that's true. The week of July 15th is basically when developers are now aiming to launch Pectra DevNet 1, and it'll go live with at least Nethermind Geth, um, Teku as the execution layer clients, probably Ethereum JS as well. Um, as the EL clients, and then from the consensus layer side, developers shared that the Lodestar, Grandine, and Nimbus clients were also ready were also being tested for the DevNet 1 launch on the consensus layer side. So that's updates on Pectra DevNet 1. Updates for PeerDAS DevNet 1, which again is being worked on in parallel to the other Pectra EIPs. Developers really want to couple PeerDAS with Pectra. The other Pectra EIPs like MaxEB and the attestation refactoring, EOF. What else? There's a couple others. There's a lot of others. PeerDAS DevNet 1 is live and has been live for a while, but developers are working on bugs, fixes from DevNet 1 that they've identified. And once those fixes are in, developers are hoping to relaunch PeerDAS DevNet 1 and hopefully find it working and running smoothly. They should have PeerDAS DevNet 1 up, should have it already up by the time you're listening to this podcast. They had said during the call by the end of the week, so that would be July 12th. So PeerDAS I think is chugging along. Developers are still thinking about how exactly to implement the changes for the blob gas limits. Right now, the maximum and the target number of blobs per block is hard coded into the execution layer and consensus layer. And developers are still hammering out the implementation, the most ideal implementation to make it not a hard coded number, but rather have it communicated from the consensus layer to the execution layer, and have all of the necessary gas calculations that happen in a block um, done accordingly, not based on a hard coded number, but based on the target and the number set by the consensus layer, aka the beacon chain. So Alex Stokes, who was chairing the ACDC call, he's a researcher at the EF. He said he is working on that and that he is hoping to formalize all of the changes that would be necessary into an EIP proposal, to share with the group and to propose for, again, inclusion into the Pectra upgrade, which continues to grow, I think. Almost every single call, the scope of the upgrade just continues to grow. And then finally, for the last bit of the call, developers talked about research from TXRX. I hadn't heard of this research team before, but they're apparently a research team within Consensus. Consensus, which is kind of like it used to be a venture, if I'm not mistaken. I've always thought when I first started working in the industry in 2018, Consensus was like a VC studio. They invested in Ethereum projects. But now I think Consensus is less, of a VC type company investing in Ethereum projects. And now they themselves are the builders. They they're major software developers in and of their own right. They have the MetaMask wallet. They've got Truffle. They're building Linnea, which is a rollup, I believe, and a couple other major Infura. They have Infura, which is the way people connect to the Ethereum blockchain. But they don't have to run their own node. They can just use the nodes from Infura, run by Infura. So Consensus has some pretty major, I would say, and very well-known products in the Ethereum ecosystem. But anyways, there is a research team within Consensus called TXRX that I learned about during this latest call. And they were given a grant by the Ethereum Foundation to do some research on a test generator for identifying certain bugs in client softwares that would lead to a fork, lead to a chain split. This is what they called a fork choice test generator. And this would be helpful because if you do have a test generator that is able to generate tests for clients, then client softwares can identify where their implementation might deviate from the specifications in such a way that their client and the way that they process blocks actually creates a chain split, actually makes their client incompatible with the client implementations of other ones. So that research, the results of that research was presented on the call. Researchers Alexander Vlasov and Mikhail Kalinin shared how they came up with the generator or the research that they did. They also showed an early implementation of that generator, showed the test suites that they've created from that generator, and talked a little bit about how they're continuing to refine that tool. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can find the link to the research in the call notes that will be shared in the show notes of this of this Infinite Jungle episode. Um, so that's really how I think that's how the call ended. And I think that by the time we talk about the next ACD call, which will be focused a little bit more on the execution layer changes going into the Pectra upgrade, I think we're gonna see Pectra DevNet 1 will have gone live, and I think we're gonna start to see more discussion on what should or should not change about Pectra DevNet 2. What additional code changes should be added to DevNet 2? Maybe what parts of the implementation of EIPs in DevNet 1 should change. For example, EIP 7702, which is the code change that developers are going to implement in Pectra that will enable more programmability and flexibility into user controlled accounts. That EIP does not yet, I think, have a revocation mechanism so that users can revoke authorizations that they've placed on user controlled accounts on EOAs. But I believe that the revocation mechanism, developers are going to try and include that into DevNet 2. So I would expect more conversations on scoping out what DevNet 2 should look like, what code changes should be included into DevNet 2. And if it isn't clear already, I really do think that the chances of the Pectra upgrade going live this year, even though that is what developers had intended initially, is quite slim. I don't think that's really going to happen. I think that Pectra, in terms of its activation on mainnet, could happen, say, the middle of next year, if not possibly later. Um, I think we'll have to see, I guess, how the testing goes. But right now, the amount of testing that is going into this upgrade is quite high, and that's why I think that it'll take quite a bit of time from now until perhaps mid-year 2025 to see it go live on the public testnets of Ethereum and eventually mainnet of Ethereum. Because right now all the testing, of course, is happening on isolated private testnets. A few other changes I think that's also worth noting is initially when Pectra was being scoped out, I had thought the headlining code change of the upgrade would be MaxEB, which is the increase of the effective balance of Ethereum from a cap of 32 ETH to now with Pectra 2048 ETH. I think that is no longer the main focus of the upgrade. It is definitely a major code change that has to be well tested and will impact quite a lot of validators and stakers on Ethereum. But I think with the inclusion of PeerDAS into Pectra, PeerDAS is probably the biggest headlining feature of the upgrade. It will dramatically increase the ability of Ethereum to support rollups, and PeerDAS I think is what protocol developers, at least, are the most excited to implement into the upgrade. So I think there's a slim chance that PeerDAS doesn't make it into Pectra. I think PeerDAS is a shoe-in for Pectra because developers are so excited about it. And I also think the focus of the upgrade in terms of what gets prioritized and what developers are clearly prioritizing is, of course, Ethereum's scalability as a DA layer. I think there are other priorities um, that have made it into the upgrade, and of course, developers are going to be working on. But when it comes to what developers care the most about, I think PeerDAS is definitely high up there. Um, and quite interesting, I think, to see how the throughout the governance process, it may not have been clear in the beginning what developers really wanted to prioritize. But I think through all of the discussions of what gets into Pectra and what doesn't, I think over time, developers have really started to, through discussion and through debates, have kind of concretely all agreed that PeerDAS is the code change that needs to make it in. Unfortunately, that realization came a little bit late into the fork scoping process, such that by the time that they did include PeerDAS into the upgrade, they already had a bunch of other things that they had already approved into the upgrade. So here we are with a large upgrade. Here we are. But to some developers, that's not a bad thing. To some developers, I think a big fork is preferred to a small fork anyways. Um, so I still maintain, though, that Pectra could happen split out into two hard forks. And as I say almost every week now on the call, there's still quite a lot unknown about the upgrade scope that we'll have to continue to monitor week by week. Um, but, I hope by now my listeners know that that is a little bit of a given. And we'll see on the next ACDE call how developers scope out, plans for DevNet 2. So that's what to expect from the next call. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's Infinite Jungle. I hope you learned something new about Ethereum. I hope you are all doing well out there, knowing that basically half the year is gone. Can we believe it? Already this year is flying by. I am signing off from Madrid, Spain, actually. I moved from Brussels, having a little stint in Spain, a little bit of personal time in Spain, before I head back to the concrete jungle in New York. In your explorations of the infinite jungle that is Ethereum, stay safe out there.